In early 1944, Japan believed it had discovered the key to halting America's advance across the Pacific. Their plan was simple: build massive island fortresses, fill them with bunkers, giant artillery, and thousands of troops, and force the U.S. into bloody frontal assaults. Rooted in centuries of samurai tradition, this strategy relied on sacrifice and attrition. But the Americans weren't planning to attack head-on. They were planning to go around. What unfolded at Kwajalein would not only be a decisive military victory, but it would shatter an entire philosophy of war. By 1944, Japan's approach had crystallized. Every island became a fortress, every shoreline a wall of fire, designed to bleed the enemy with every step. Tarawa had served as a blueprint. A coral reef no wider than a mile had cost the U.S. over 1,000 Marines. Japan envisioned repeating that horror on a massive scale. Islands like Jalut, Miller, and Wachi were transformed with reinforced concrete bunkers, massive coastal guns, and thousands of troops ordered to fight to the last breath. These defenses weren't temporary, they were monuments to defiance. Soldiers were reminded daily, death with honor over retreat with shame. Yet Japan's confidence rested on a fatal assumption that America would fight the way they expected, rigidly, predictably, through frontal assaults. They assumed U.S. forces were bound by tradition, unimaginative, and would hammer their strongest points. But while Japan fortified the obvious, American strategists studied the gaps. They weren't planning to break the fortress, they planned to make it irrelevant. What Japan saw as strength became its greatest liability. By 1943, U.S. codebreakers at Station Hypo had already decrypted key Japanese naval communications. Every reinforcement schedule, supply route, and defensive plan fed into American analysis, revealing a fundamental flaw in Japanese doctrine. Behind the outer fortresses of the Marshall Islands sat Kwajalein Atoll, the administrative hub, defended by only 1,200 combat troops among 5,000 personnel. Japan believed the outer fortresses shielded it, but to Admiral Nimitz, that was an opportunity. He asked, "Why strike strength when weakness is exposed?" His plan would ignore the outer defenses entirely and strike at the heart, upending decades of conventional military thinking. Japan never imagined an enemy would bypass battle-hardened positions to target support infrastructure. Even as the Americans staged bombardments of the outer islands, Japanese commanders interpreted it as proof their doctrine was working. In reality, the shelling was a distraction, designed to hold attention while transport fleets maneuvered past the fortresses under cover of night and weather. On January 30, 1944, Kwajalein awoke to silence. The outer islands had endured weeks of bombardment, but the lagoon remained calm until U.S. battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and 40,000 troops appeared inside, bypassing every gun aimed at the sea. Japanese artillery faced the wrong way. Within hours, command posts were destroyed, communications severed, and the entire strategic model collapsed. Admiral Manzo Akiyama wrote in his journal, "The enemy fights outside our imagination. The doctrine has failed." The battle was decided before the first Marines set foot on the beaches. Naval bombardment had transformed Kwajalein into a lunar landscape. Trees gone, trenches shattered, bunkers obliterated. Japanese resistance was fierce but desperate. Clerks, cooks, and radio operators fought against tanks and flamethrowers, many charging in near-suicidal attacks. Within 96 hours, organized resistance ended. Roughly 8,500 Japanese were dead. U.S. casualties numbered fewer than 400. But the broader devastation came from what the Americans ignored. On Jalut, Mille, and Wachi, thousands of elite troops remained in fortified positions, armed and ready for assaults that never came. Bypassed by U.S. forces, they were isolated, cut off from supplies, and slowly starved. Ammunition dwindled, food ran out, and disease spread. Trapped in fortress islands, their training for heroic last stands was rendered meaningless. By war's end, over 40,000 Japanese remained stranded on bypassed islands, many dying without firing a single shot. They weren't defeated by force, they were defeated by irrelevance. This campaign revealed a harsh truth. Japan's belief in fixed, fortified positions and attritional warfare was obsolete. The Americans had redefined combat, prioritizing mobility, speed, and precision. Island hopping targeted critical infrastructure, supply lines, and command hubs, isolating the enemy instead of confronting it head-on. The strongest positions became liabilities, elite troops became stranded, and fortresses intended to ensure honor instead guaranteed neglect. Kwajalein marked the collapse of centuries-old military philosophy. Japan had prepared for decisive battles rooted in courage and sacrifice. The U.S. used strategy and adaptability. Mobility and imagination triumphed over rigid tradition and firepower. The fall of Kwajalein didn't just reshape the Pacific theater, it signaled a new era of warfare, where victory belonged to those who didn't stand firm, but to those who refused to stand still.